All right, Shalom. I want to start off by giving our praise, honor, and glory due to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rakakodash. I'd like to give double honors unto the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone, who I learned this truth from. And I'd like to say peace and salutations unto the hopefully elect. And today, I just want to do a quick response, to the IUIC, because yet again, they're confusing what adultery is, man, because IUIC, they teach that a man having more than one woman is adultery, which they're incorrect on. A man having more than one woman is lawful. That's not adultery, and they have it, wrong. So I'm just going to bring out a few scriptures. Lord willing, this lesson is edifying and straight to the point. And it seems like, you IUIC guys, you just try to, make a simple breakdown, difficult by just changing the meaning of a breakdown and making it something else, because I'm going to just say it bluntly, you have to be some of the dumbest niggas because it's just no way, man. Like, the topic of adultery has been broken down time and time and time and time and time again, but you guys clearly still don't have the true understanding of what adultery is. So before I bring out the scriptures, I'm just going to explain it. Adultery is when a man sleeps with a married woman. That's adultery, or what people today call cheating. That American BS, but it's adultery. A man sleeping with another man's woman, right? And then vice versa, a woman that has a man or a husband, sleeping with another man, that's adultery. A man having multiple women is not adultery. As long as those multiple women that he's dealing with don't have a husband, then that's lawful. You have plenty of examples in the scriptures where you had some of our forefathers that had multiple women. One of the most notable, being King Solomon. He had 1,000 women, which I'm going to bring that out. But what you fail to realize is, you IOIC guys, is that polygamy has always been, and I would just say an Eastern custom, because it's not only an Israelite thing, because you have other nations that practice the same thing. Like, even still today, like over there in the East, you still have Ishmael, that practices polygamy, one man having multiple women. I'm sure Moab, they still do it, to a degree. Ammon, they're not really, you know what I'm saying? Because as far as the population, in Japan is declining because, they're not producing or reproducing, I should say. But, primarily, Ishmael, Elam, and, Ham, because Ham, they practice polygamy as well. So again, that is lawful, and one of the most notable men that had multiple women, is our forefather Jacob. And what you guys fail to realize is that if Jacob wouldn't have had 4 women, there probably wouldn't have been the 12 tribes. Now, obviously, the Lord can do what he wants, but still, he worked 7 years to get one, wife. But, Laban, or Laban, however you want to pronounce it, he pretty much, finessed Jacob. Jacob wanted one daughter. Laban gave him his other daughter, if I'm not mistaken. He wanted Rachel, and Laban gave him Leah. I forget. I may have it backwards if I do, Salakia. But again, Jacob worked a total of 21 years. So he had substance. After he left, he had substance, and he had 4 wives, because each of those daughters, they both had, a handmaid. So by default, those handmaids would be Jacob's women. So he had the 2 sisters and their handmaids. So he had 4 women, 4 wives total, So are you guys saying that our forefather Jacob was an adulterer? Because if so, you're incorrect. Jacob was an adulterer. Neither was Abraham. He had, more than one woman. But again, this is the one thing you guys, you just can't get past. Monogamy is a fucking American practice. Just explaining this, or trying to explain this to a guy the other day, which he didn't get it. He was a heathen, you know what I'm saying? But still, it's not a new thing, man. This always been a thing. It's just, I'll just say it like how, you know, brothers was explaining this, at class last week. The so-called Israel, well, I won't say the so-called, but the Israelite men, so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native American men, especially the so-called black men, we're the only nation of men that are dick policed. And what I mean by that is we're the only nation of men that, get criticized for dealing with women of different nationalities. Like, we're just obligated to only deal with the black woman, which is false. We don't have to only deal with, the Israelite woman. We can reproduce with any woman on the earth. And there's even examples in the scriptures where you had, our forefathers that dealt with women of the other nations. I'll use Moses as an example. His wife was Ethiopian, so she was a Hamite, or a Cushite, I should say. He's not, going off by doing that, But even then, man, like, you guys you can't get past it because you don't question your leader, not leadership, your leader, because he's a bishop, because it clearly says a bishop must have one wife, But again, he pretty much tells his whole congregation that they can only have one woman, or if you have more than one woman, you got to cut her off. Then if you cut that woman off, then you're going to cause her to commit adultery. This is what you guys fail to realize. And it even says that excuse me, it's like it even says that in the scriptures, man, not to cause your wife to commit adultery. So just not to ramble too much, man, but again, you guys lack understanding in something as simple as this, when that's exactly what it is, man. So I'm going to start with Exodus chapter 20 and verse 14, and it says, "Thou shalt not commit adultery." Plain and simple, we're not supposed to commit adultery. You're not supposed to lust after another man's wife, let alone lie with her, right? So it doesn't say it directly, or it's not given the exact definition that I want, but the Strong's definition is Strong's H5003 Na'ap, or Na'af. But it says to commit adultery, figuratively, to apostatize, adulterer, commit adultery, woman that breaketh wedlock. So again, it's not, a woman, that sleeps with another man and she has a husband. Yes, she's breaking wedlock, because again, she's, bound by the law of that man until he dies, So let me get that real quick. Yep. 1 Corinthians chapter 7. I'll start at verse 36. It says, "But if any man think that he behaveth himself uncomely toward his virgin, if she pass the flower of her age," meaning she has her menstrual cycle, "and need so require, let him do what he will. He sinneth not, let them marry." So right, if a man gets himself a wife, again, just like it says in the scriptures, he getteth himself a possession. Once a woman, she has her menstrual, she is then able to bear children. She's ready. Obviously, in this current society, we wouldn't be doing that, But again, this is an ancient custom. Women will be married off young, And one thing a woman being married off at a young age would prevent is whoredom, first and foremost. And, it prevents her from adultery, being married off to a man. But, we know the flesh sometimes, but still, man. Verse 37. Nevertheless, he that standeth steadfast in his heart, having no necessity, but hath power over his own will, and so hath decreed in his heart that he will keep his virgin, doeth well. So again, if he has a virgin, again, that's that man's wife. If a man takes a woman's virginity, she is your wife. Just like it says, if I'm not mistaken, it's in Deuteronomy 22. The cloth. The cloth that would be presented. After a man and the woman, they do the act. You know what act I'm talking about. She will bleed on that cloth, and the parents of that woman, would keep that cloth, as a receipt, to prove that, their daughter was a virgin when that man gets her. If he just decides he doesn't love her anymore or tries to say that, she wasn't a virgin, that cloth was proof that she was. Verse 38 says, so then he that giveth her in marriage doeth well, but he that giveth her not in marriage doeth better. Or it's like he that giveth her not in marriage doeth better. This is the point. The wife is bound by the law as long as her husband liveth. But if her husband be dead, she is at liberty to be married to whom she will, only in the Lord. So right, man. If a woman gets married to a man, she is bound by the law of her husband, meaning she cannot remarry unless her husband is dead. If she's a widow, she is allowed to remarry. She's not going off by doing that. I did a video on that, a couple months ago. You had a dude pretty much going on a rant that, Vanessa Bryant, Kobe Bryant's, widow wife, because we know Kobe Bryant died, is married to another man and she's pregnant. Well, she probably still isn't now, but, she's, having a child by another man. Again, she's not going off by doing that. She's a widow. Her husband died. So just like it said in the scriptures, she's allowed to remarry, whoever she wants. Again, as long as she's not committing adultery or she's not an adulteress, she's good, But if a woman is married to a man and he doesn't die, she's bound by the law. Hence the reason why, when you hear people, get married, what does usually the preacher say? Till death do you part. So literally, man, that woman is bound by that man until, either of them dies, But again, if her husband dies, untimely, she is allowed to remarry or remain unmarried. But we know most women will not remain unmarried, A lot of women aren't like Judith, because she was a virtuous woman, And that goes to show you how much she loved her husband, that she remained unmarried and, for the rest of her life, But again, the point being is that, you guys have the concept of adultery wrong, man. Well, not the concept, but you have adultery wrong. It's not a man having multiple women. So let's get, since you guys are, just so heavy on the law, again, let's get into it, right? So this is the book of, it's like I went to Luke. I'm meant to go to Leviticus chapter 20 and verse 10. And it says, and the man that committeth adultery with another man's wife, even he that committeth adultery with his neighbor's wife, the adulterer and adulteress shall surely be put to death. So right, it just said it right there in this verse. A man that committeth adultery, meaning if a man has sex with another man's wife, he and that woman are going to be put to death because he's an adulterer, she is an adulteress. They both consented, on committing this act, which is against the law. Again, I just read it in Exodus. It's plain and simple, that you're not supposed to commit adultery. Meaning, again, you're not supposed to have sex with any man's, not just the Israelite man's, any man's, even the heathens, man. We can't do that. That's adultery. You ruin homes that way, And then on top of that, it's nasty. You don't know what that man has been doing with this woman. That's his business. But again, you guys just don't understand. Adultery is not a man having multiple women. It's not going off. A lot of guys, especially in today's society, don't know or realize that they're, you know, practicing polygamy, but they're just not doing it the right way. Hence the reason why you have the term baby daddies or baby mamas, right? You have one man that will have children by multiple women. I'll use my cousin as an example. He has, I forget how many children he has, about five, I want to say, about four different women. He's not going off by doing that. That's not adultery. As long as, those women that he dealt with weren't with a man, beforehand, before bringing forth children, then again, there's nothing wrong with that, you know. But again, you guys have it incorrect, so let's go back to Exodus. All right, Exodus 20. It should be further down. Yep, Exodus 20 and verse 17. It says, "Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's house. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife." That's the main point I want to get. It says, nor his manservant, nor his maidservant, nor his ox, nor his ass, nor anything that is thy neighbor's. So right, man, you're not supposed to covet another man's wife. That's adultery. Because again, adultery starts in the mind, before it's played out. Because if you see a woman, obviously if a man sees a woman, she looks nice. Obviously he's thinking about what he wants to do to that woman. It starts in the mind first. Then, if a man, we already know, we know how it goes, but at the same time, this is adultery. Lusting after another man's woman, sleeping with another man's woman, that's adultery. Not having multiple wives, man. So again, if that's the case, then our King Solomon, who was our Lord Yahweh Shai and the reincarnation, if you can receive it, he had 1,000 women, right? So I'm going to get that in 1 Kings chapter 11, and I'm going to start at verse 1. It says, "But King Solomon loved many strange women," meaning the women of the other nations, "together with the daughter of Pharaoh, the Egyptians, women of the Moabites, the so-called Chinese, Ammonites, the Japanese, Edomites, white women, Zidonians." If I'm not mistaken, that may be, Hamite tribes. If not, a brother can correct me. And the Hittites, are so-called African women. Verse 2, "Of the nations concerning which the Lord said unto the children of Israel, Ye shall not go in to them, neither shall they come in unto you. For surely they will turn your heart after their gods. Solomon clave unto these in love." Once King Solomon got older, he went off, because again, that's what he did. He started, worshiping, the gods of his wives or his concubines in particular, Verse 3, and this is the point. It says, "And he had 700 wives," so 700 Israelite women, "princesses, and 300 concubines," women of the other nations. "And his wives turned away his heart." So right, they turned him away from worshiping the Heavenly Father to worshiping their gods, So again, King Solomon, he was a righteous man, up until his older age, and then, he went off. But for the most part, King Solomon didn't commit adultery. King David, yes, he committed adultery because he slept with Uriah the Hittite's wife, Bathsheba, and I was listening to another brother's video. I forget who, Salakia, because I would like to give that brother credit, but he said, he mentioned this, that, Bathsheba could have purposely, went and, bathed, wherever she was. I forget where she was, but still, bathed. She probably could have known David was going to be at that particular spot, just to see. Just speculation, but at the same time, still, King David committed adultery, because he slept with Bathsheba, who was Uriah the Hittite's wife. That was adultery, man. Him dealing with another man's woman, not him having multiple women. And even King David himself had multiple wives, right? That was adultery. Absalom, that wicked nigga, his son committed adultery. He slept with one of, if not, all of King David's concubines, in front of all Israel in a tent to see. You know, that was adultery right there, man. Adultery is a man sleeping with another man's woman, IUIC, not having multiple wives. It's okay. You can have multiple women. Isaiah 4:1 is going to take place on this side, not the kingdom, man. That's going to take place before the kingdom. Once we get in the kingdom, we're going to have numerous women, you know. But on this side, men are going to have multiple women. I say it all the time, every time I read 2nd Esdras, the 16th chapter, concerning women that are going to be left out here, you know, because again, you're going to have a lot of women that are going to be left defenseless, you know, because again, World War III is on the horizon. You know, a lot of men are going to get drafted. For the ones that don't get drafted are going to be thrown into concentration camps. You know, they're going to be put to death by the sword, or they're going to die by the famine, or however the Lord, you know, is going to take them out. But a lot of men are going to die out here, man. So a lot of women are going to be defenseless. They're not going to have any protection out here. But they're going to flock to the men of the Lord for the protection, you know, to save themselves. Multiple women, it says. Let me just grab it, man. Because this is going to take place. This here is not adultery, man. Even though they didn't bring this up, this is not adultery. This is Isaiah chapter 4 and verse 1. It says, "And in that day 7 women shall take hold of one man, saying, We will eat our own bread and wear our own apparel. Only let us be called by thy name to take away our reproach and right," man. You know, these women out here, they're gonna be out here. They're not gonna give a damn what a man looks like. You know, the men of the Lord, the true men of the Lord, the elect men in particular, they're not gonna care what they look like, how tall they are. The only thing they're gonna want is to be with that man, to be called his wife. You know, they're gonna take care of themselves. They're gonna have their own food. You know, they're gonna do this. The only thing they're gonna want is to be called that man's wife. You know, and it says 7. You know, 7 just represents completion. You know, any, you know, elect man during this time can have any number of women. It could literally be 7. It could be 10. However many women are going to cleave to certain brothers. You know, the ones, you know, the sisters that are slated to be saved, the Lord is going to have cleaved to certain men, you know, and there's going to be more than one, and they're going to be okay with it. That's not adultery. Because again, a lot of women are going to be widows, man. Again, I said it, a lot of these men are going to die in these wars, man. So matter of fact, I'll just end it on that, you know, because again, adultery, again, is not having multiple wives. IUIC. Adultery is a man sleeping with another man's wife. Plain and simple. This is 2nd Esdras chapter 16 and verse 33. It says, "The virgin shall mourn, having no the virgin shall mourn, having no bridegrooms. The women shall mourn, having no husbands. Their daughters shall mourn, having no helpers." So right, man, a lot of women, they're going to be out here mourning. Why? Because they're not going to have any men to protect them. But why aren't they going to have men? Verse 34, "In the wars shall their bridegrooms be destroyed." So men are going to die during World War III. You know, they're going to be over there in the East fighting. They're going to die over there. They're not coming home. It says, "And their husbands shall perish of famine and right." Whatever man, you know, that is not of the elect, that somehow escapes this draft, you know, he's going to die of the famine. And if he doesn't die of the famine, he's going to die somehow, some way. And it's not going to be, you know, it's not going to be light, man. A lot of these men are going to suffer out here, you know, are going to die grievous deaths, you know. But even then, the sisters that are slated to be saved are going to be saved, you know. But a lot of women are going to be left defenseless during this time. So here's the reason why multiple women are going to cleave to one man, you know. So again, IYC, you are incorrect. Adultery is not a man having multiple women. That is lawful. That's how you build a nation. Matter of fact, let me get that, you know. Because how do you explain this? All right, Slakia, bear with me. Spell check, man. All right, I'll end it with this. This is the book of Isaiah, chapter 60 and verse 20. Or 22, Slakia, Isaiah 60 and 22. A little one shall become 1,000, and a small one a strong nation. The Lord will hasten it in his time. So, right, how do you think a little one is going to, it says one shall become 1,000. How do you have that? One man is going to have 1,000 women. It's like King Solomon, but we could have even more. We'll just have to wait and see. But again, one man having 1,000 women, that's how you build a nation, man. Each Israelite man is pretty much going to be like a nation of his own, man. You know, we're going to bring back the nation of Israel, man, because does it not say in the scriptures that Israel is as the sand of the sea? So there's many of us, man. There's many of us. That's the point of a man having multiple wives, to be fruitful and multiply, as it says in the scriptures, man. That's how you do that, you know. So that's how the nation is going to be brought back. The 2/3, that's how they're going to be brought back, by way of being born. You know, they're going to be children to the elect, you know. And how is that going to happen? Each Israelite man, starting with the elect, having multiple women. It's not adultery. It's just a regular practice, man. You know, so you guys, you're wrong. Get it together. Get it the fuck together, man. Adultery ain't a man having multiple women. Adultery is a man sleeping with another man's woman. Okay? So, Lord willing, this lesson was edifying. I want to give all praise, honor, and glory due to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rakakwadash. I'd like to give double honors unto the apostles and the elders of the great millstone, who I let this truth from. And I'd like to say peace and salutations unto the hopefully elect. Till the next time I say, Shalom.